Welcome to Something to Talk About. We're here to talk about gardening with our wonderful gardeners from the Bainbridge Senior Community Center who've been out all morning making the lawns or the gardens and beds more beautiful. Thank you, ladies. And there was a gentleman or two involved as well, but they seem to have gone home for lunch. So I want to start something to talk about by acknowledging that we are meeting on the ancestral homelands of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people. Specifically the Suquamish tribe, who have lived on these waters of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. And we are grateful for learning from them about how to be better stewards of these lands and waters. Also, something to talk about is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care up on Rolling Bay. They have beautiful spot there in the spot of the old messenger house. They'd love to have you come by and take a visit, and they'll feed you a meal if you want. Call Celia or Jamie at 206-594-1010. Well, Ann Lovejoy is our ringleader here. Thank you, Ann.
Oh, thank you.
And Jerry and Rita
Yeah.
for joining us for this conversation.
We had so much fun today. There was like 7 or 8 people showed up to help, and including a man with loppers who said that he wasn't allowed to lop things at home, but he was very happy to be able to lop things.
If you'd like to use your loppers, come on down.
Use your loppers. Let's talk. But I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
And it actually is a good time to do some of that pruning because of the winter damage. All those branches that came down, a lot of them hit stuff. So you'll notice that a lot of shrubs have broken pieces and so forth. And figuring out like how to sculpturally prune, not just cut the crap out of everything, but
Yes.
to really look at the shape and see how it should be. But this is a good time to do that kind of pruning for sure.
Mm-hmm. Because we're early enough.
Yeah, well, it's been such a weird year, another weird year.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things are just beginning to kind of leaf out. So it's still fine to do some of that kind of pruning. And shrubs are much more forgiving than like trees. Their cycle is shorter and quicker and, they can put up with a lot more.
Mhm.
So yeah, you can do that kind of pruning. I'm not a big fan of shearing. We had a little conversation about shearing today. Giving an artificial shape to a plant. What that actually does is it condenses it and it makes it so dense and thick that no air gets in. So then all the growth is only on the outside. And then you get dead patches and so forth. And the other thing that happens is there's no room at the inn. And so it's no longer a haven for birds or insects or critters because there's no there. They can't get in. And when it's in, it's just a barren bunch of dead sticks.
Uh-huh.
So shearing, poodle balling, when you say
Right.
that,
Yeah.
is actually not very helpful and really not very attractive unless you're an extreme neatnik. In which case, I would recommend you take your glasses off and take a walk in the Grand Forest and see how it looks when things have not been sheared. Like the huckleberries are beautiful, those shapely little shrubs. We can have that same kind of natural beauty in our yards.
So when you're looking then to get those loppers out, what are you looking for? What's sort of the guidepost about when and where to trim?
Well, on shrubs, it's kind of an interesting thing because if they have been densely pruned like that and they've been sheared a lot, you can actually reach in, take a handful and trim that off. And you're kind of like making windows into the body of the shrub. And the rest of it will sort of semi-collapse around it. So it isn't like you have a gaping hole. Or if you did, oops, it'll grow back. But for the most part, you just keep taking about a quarter of it out by moving around. You want to keep moving. Otherwise, it's like when you pull all your gray hairs out.
Mm-hmm.
So they're there. You want to make sure that you've evenly distributed what you're taking out. But then that will get light and air to the center, which is always the goal of pruning. Believe it or not, it's not really about size control.
Okay.
It's actually about making sure the core of the plant gets light and air.
Now, is this a good time to do that for roses or no?
Roses have a little different, because roses basically, they're beautiful flowers, but they're pretty frumpy as a shrub. They don't have a lot of structure. They're not really very shapely. A lot of shrubs have this beautiful praying hands structure, right? And you look at them and think, this just needs to be cleaned up and then it can have its shape. But a rose is kind of not that. Right.
Okay.
So instead, what you do is, depending on whether it's a great big huge shrub or whether it's a hybrid tea, in which case it's going to have a few stems, every year you take out about a quarter of the oldest, gnarliest stems, which are usually kind of gray or brownish
Yeah.
and looking funky, and you carefully take them out.
And I mean, some of them, they're often at the bottom, right?
They're always at the bottom. Yeah. And to avoid cutting their neighbors, you can do two things. I use this silicone oven mitt thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
Put against the things that are nearby the shrub, the stem you're trying to remove. And when you cut into it with the saw, it doesn't mess up your saw, but it also doesn't cut into the stems that are near the ones you want to get rid of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you don't end up wounding the plant while you're trying
Or
to.
cutting your hand.
so which can you use the clippers on that or?
You can.
Or saw's better?
You can use clippers, especially the kind that have a curvy blade and you want to put that curve right up against the mother there. But those big stems are often pretty gnarly at the bottom.
Mhm.
So I use my gomboy saw with the tip is pretty narrow and you can get in there and angle it in without doing too much damage to everything around it.
Mhm.
And then on the top growth, I don't like to prune the roses too early because we can have those snap colds even in March. But right about now, they're leafing out. You can tell they're looking pretty good. And I go down to maybe the nicest looking set of leaves and cut at an angle. Because as we were talking about this morning, if you cut straight across, it's a place for water to pool and that's where rot can start. But if you cut at an angle, the rain will kind of drip off and you tend to not get so much dead wood around. And you want to cut not just right at the nice pair of leaves, but above a little bit so that if you do get some dieback, it won't kill those buds that you just were trying to promote. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How about trimming a lilac now? Because lilac's gonna bloom in about another 2 weeks.
Yeah,
3
so
weeks.
if it's gonna bloom pretty soon, if it's a spring bloomer, I'd wait because you can already see a lot of lilacs have already opened, the bud sheath is starting to open and you can see where the flowers are. But the time to prune them is actually after they bloom. And you look and a lot of them are every other year heavy bloomers, like especially the older lilacs.
Mhm.
Like if they have a fantastic year, the next year they'll be a little sparse. But one way you can even it out is again, you look at they're very branched in pairs like that. And so if you take out what bloomed down to the pair below it,
Mhm.
right? Then those two will become the dominant ones and they'll both bloom the next year. And you keep doing that. And after a while, you've evened it out and it blooms about the same amount every year.
And are you thinking about that like 25% kind of goal for that?
You
Or
wouldn't even come close to it for that. But again, lilacs, a lot of older shrubs, they have those big gnarly
Yeah.
old, and the same kind of thing. Every 3 to 5 years, you take out about a quarter to a third of the oldest, gnarliest at the base. And you can do that really pretty much anytime you want to with that kind of thing. But summer pruning is really good for not promoting suckers. Like winter pruning stimulates new growth,
okay,
but summer pruning doesn't because hormonally plants are shifted to setting flowers and fruit and ripening and that kind of stuff. So they're not gonna be so busy trying to resprout. So if you have like fruit trees especially, you always want to prune in like late June, early July, right in there.
Plum trees too?
Definitely plum trees too.
Oh my goodness, I was gonna prune ours now.
you were gonna prune it
I thought the
down.
opposite. I thought you did prune during growth hormone season, so you don't get a lot of rebound growth.
Well, it's sort of, when you think about the plant cycle, so in winter, if they get damaged, they do spring growth. And so you'll get, if you cut just a heading cut, we call it, you'll get what we call a hydra head, where you'll get 7 or 8
Right.
sprouts, which is not really prime. That's not what you want. But if you do a shaping cut that's kind of following the shape of the plant and just take some of the side branches off, you won't get that same thing. It's when you lop the top or
Okay.
like a big major branch and you take the head of that off, then you're gonna get the hydra head.
And if you're dealing with a fruit tree, you're less likely to have that kind of response if you wait till the summer.
Mhm. Now, fruit trees, one of the things that happens to them is they get weed whacked. And then they get
Around the-
damaged around the
trunk.
base, and that's when they do a lot of suckering.
Ah,
So one thing you can do is like remove all the grass from around them and put in something like a ground cover, like epimedium, or if it's a fruit tree and there's a lot of sun, I would use like oregano or something like that that's evergreen. Make a big enough circle that you're not going to get in there and harm the biggest main cause of death for fruit trees is disease caused by scarring and wounds from those weed whackers.
Wow.
I know, because it seems so easy.
Right, no,
You know that.
I'm just feeling guilty right now.
Right? But if you wait until like late June, early July and if you miss that window, just, into even a little bit into September, and cut those suckers off, then they won't resuck at that time. You won't get new shoots at that time. Now, one thing that happens a lot, I just was talking to some neighbors who had cut a lot off a cherry tree and then the roots are running all over the place and suckering,
Oh,
right? And even after the cherry tree was taken out, those roots are still going and they're still trying to be a tree, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you have to actually dig them out. Or as you get older, the sustainable technique is to cause it to be done by others. It's all in the wrist.
Yes.
You say,
Exactly.
honey, could you please? Right?
yeah, but along those lines, it's good to know what it is you want before you just send somebody out there with loppers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You definitely, like this morning, it was great because we
Yeah.
had someone who had loppers.
We had about 8 people here at the center who were doing
good.
cleanup and fix up.
It was awesome.
It was awesome. We had some loppers.
Gentleman said, I'm noticing this branch goes like this and then it goes like this. I would like to take that out. And I said, if you do this and this, you certainly may, right? He's like, oh, good, because my wife would not let me do that. That was hilarious. But if that's the kind of thing you like, are they rubbing? Are they growing in instead of out?
Yes.
Are they broken and damaged? You look at the structure of a plant and try to open up the spaces of that. Like Japanese maples, people shear those and then they turn into a tight ball that looks disgusting. But if you look at them, they're shaped with V's.
Okay.
Always, that's their structure. So you open the V's, like if there's too much crowding, remove the side pieces and make sure that it's all about the open V's, and then it will be this graceful shape.
Another thing that you've talked about that makes me think about this idea of cause no harm are weed leaf blowers. So I know that increasingly people are now using electric leaf blowers.
But it's still, it's not only about the emissions, it's what happens when you hit the soil. It's like a tsunami of wind, or like a hurricane or a tornado, really. Not the water, but the wind and the heat. So it kills the top inch or so of soil.
Oh, my.
And all the biota that's living in it, or that was
Right.
before you came in. And a lot of people have this idea that, there should be bare earth. But really, nothing in nature ever does that.
Well, bare earth or, pardon the words, beauty bark.
Yeah, well,
Oh, here we go.
here we go. Like, let's talk about bark. Jerry, you had a question about
I had
bark.
a question. This woman came up to me and she said, I had bark last year and put it on my gardens and now it doesn't look very good. Should I get the better quality bark or should I and then I said, get compost.
Yeah,
Compost, good.
yeah.
But does she need to rake up the old bark or dig it around and?
No, because as bark breaks down, and the thing is, you want to know which kind of bark you got, because sometimes people get like cedar bark, which actually has, or walnut, they have chemicals that kill a lot of things, right?
Mhm, yeah.
And so that's great for a path. If you want a path that's going to stay weed,
And kill everything.
yeah, then that's good. Otherwise, you want to make sure it's a whole tree, that it's like arborist chips that include everything. And a medium grind is fine. And you layer that on, and we here at the center, because we have full sun and we have the wind off the water, which salt and wind and heat. And when there is sun, it's really strong because this is almost due south. So we found the soil will dry out so fast. And this little garden we planted, 3 years ago?
Yes.
Much, it's grown beautifully, but we had the first couple of years, Rita and I were out there watering a lot, like every third day. And now we don't really have to because we use the bark to kind of protect the soil. But in between, when the bark gets kind of worn out, then you put a layer of compost on, and then you put another layer of bark on top of that.
Bark or wood chips?
Yeah, wood chips,
Wood
excuse
chips
me.
is what you
Yes.
really do.
Thank you, because you gotta watch my mouth.
Exactly. Don't use bark. No bark.
Yeah, because bark is really, it sheds water, and you'll notice that I've noticed quite a bit. There's some shrubs in some public plantings even where they're mulched with bark and then the plant turns yellow and dries up because the bark sheds water. It also takes nutrients out of the soil as it's breaking down. And so the plant is like, it needs to be fed. It needs to be actually watered better, but you can take that, all that bark stuff away, put it through a compost heap where it gets, it's like diluting a toxin, right? Break it down with a bunch of other stuff. Because arborist chips contain the twigs, the lichens, the everything that was there. And it's just a different mixture, right?
And a lot of times, or probably maybe even most times, the bark, a lot of times has coloring, artificial coloring put in it.
Yeah.
Make it different colors.
Right? Or did you ever notice like that beautiful dark and then you put it in your hands, they're turned black?
Yeah.
Now, often that's iron, but still, it's not really what, plants don't need iron supplements, really. So, yeah. And if they do, they need that pelated iron, which is in a form that's absorbable that they can take in. But
So I had a question. And it's kind of on the same line. So if you're gonna put a little bit of food down.
Yeah.
A little bit of food, and then you could put some compost on. Or you could put some chips on, or you could put food and then a little compost and then chips on top of it.
sandwich. Yeah, and this is a
Okay.
great time to do that. Like I like Dr. Earth, that scratch in stuff.
Yeah.
And just, you want to remember that where plants eat is not here. It's more like here. So what you look at the drip line of whatever it is, if it's a perennial and it's, here's the little crown, but you know perfectly well from dead stuff that you just cut off, that it's actually drip line is out here. That's where the active feeder roots are. So they're not here. And putting food here doesn't actually do much of anything except make some happy weeds. But scatter that, you can rake the old chips away, scatter the fertilizer on, and that stuff is great. Like a lot of our soil is not very good, basically. Here on the island, it tends to be pretty heavy clay or pretty sandy with a lot of iron oxide in it, which is okay, but they're not great soils. So giving fertilizer at this time of year, plants are still figuring out, they're getting ready to do their bloom and put out leaves. They could really use a little help. So you put that down and you can put compost over it, or you can just put more chips over it, or you can do both, whatever. But the chips role is really to kind of keep the soil moisture locked in and protect it from wind and sun, right?
So what's the menu for this, for feeding your garden?
Well, like I said, I like the Doctor's Earth. I used to mix my own, when I had a really big garden, it was much cheaper to buy stuff like in 40-pound bags and mix it all up in a wheelbarrow. And you can certainly do that. But a lot of us have downsized and we don't have acreage anymore. Plus, even if we did, it's all we're doing the risk thing and we're having other people deal with it. And big sustainable forest gardens, like shade gardens, they don't need to be fertilized. They just need to have what sheds, all the stuff that's shed from the trees just needs to stay in place pretty much. And if you do that, you find you don't need to be doing a lot of extra nutrition. But like in our vegetable beds, in our edible beds, in our ornamental beds, where things are getting tidied up and they don't get the nutritional benefit of the whatever dead stuff is, right? That's when you want to do some feeding for sure. If you want to do, our soils are fairly low in a lot of minerals, so I often will put some kelp meal down too, or liquid kelp spray, because kelp has all those great ocean minerals in it, right? And it's one of those very sustainable harvesting things where actually all over the world, people are growing kelp as a crop.
Right.
Sustainably, which is so cool, right? But yeah, so go ahead.
I have a veggie garden question, or a few. My neighbor, lets me use her veggie garden. Has a fence and it's probably bigger than this room. So this is good. It's nice. And we made a couple of raised beds, but we've got a lot of just flat beds. And this year I had a lot of leaves, like the big leaf maple leaves, and we just threw them all over the garden. We don't have any weeds now, but those weeds or those leaves are kind of hard to break down. I don't know we don't know what to do with them now. We should try to dig them under or.
Well, you can, but the thing about big leaves like that is the more cut surface there is, the faster the bacteria can get there and work on them. So if you get a hold of a little shredder, I used to have a hand crank shredder from Germany that was really cool. When you think about what Where did that go 40 years ago? Who knows? But shredding, or even if you have a lawnmower, run over the leaves before you put them on, or borrow somebody's, right? You can use your weed whacker for that kind of thing too. It's like whack the leaves and shred them up. But as soon as they were broken, then everybody starts working on them. But when they're intact,
Kinda late to do that, isn't it now?
not really. I mean, but in that situation, I'd probably put wet, like make sure they're super wet
Mhm.
and then put compost on top
Okay.
and maybe chips over that.
And
And
about coffee grounds. Put
coffee grounds are great.
Yeah, that's
High
another thing.
nitrogen too, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you can mix that with your browns.
You can. I usually use coffee grounds around things like tomato plants that really, really like it. And it helps tomato plants resist late blight. So just take the filters out because that's tacky, but the little circles and roses really like it. And again, you don't want it around the neck. You want it around the root zone.
Yeah.
Because that's where the action is, right? But yeah, coffee grounds are great. Used coffee grounds, right? They also will dry slugs out. So little slugs track across, they take up the caffeine residues in their soft bodies
Oh.
and then they turn into these little dried up things that are perfect earrings. If you have gardening friends, you can like cute, right?
Yes.
Ornaments.
You know what you're having for getting for your birthday?
I know, right? I'm looking at you, Jerry.
And if you don't, have a lot of coffee, we have coffee grounds, usually Starbucks or some of the other places have free if you want to go get them.
Yeah, at the library, we used to go every week to that place, Creative Comforts.
Right.
Commuter
Comfort
comforts.
comforts.
Yeah, and get like 100 pounds a week, and we used that in our compost for many years.
Right.
Worms love it. So if you have a worm bin, coffee grounds are awesome. But yeah, a lot of the smaller places are happy to give you
Yes.
a bag or whatever.
Well, you mentioned worm bins. Tell us a little bit about whether that's something we want to do.
Kind of depends. Worm bins are great if you have a pretty constant supply of green waste that doesn't involve citrus. Or it has to be organic. Like I've had several people say, gosh, my worm bin was doing great. I put the banana peels in and everybody died. And it's like, well, were they organic bananas? Oh, because it's what they use on bananas is systemic. And so the toxin is in every part of it. So you have to really think about that. Like what's going in your worm bin has to be something that isn't going to kill them. Hello, right? It's like not using poison sprays and then hoping the butterflies and birds will come because you're going to kill them, right? But if you do want to do a worm bin and you do have a fairly, like a lot of, mostly I put in stuff like vegetable
Right.
stuff.
Mhm.
They will eat to some extent scraps of meat and stuff like that. Surprisingly, they'll do eggshells. I usually crush them first. Because they'll break down fat. Again, it's like the more cut surface you have, the fat, easier it is for everybody to get in there and deal with it. But with worm bins, usually there's you have like the top where you can put all the stuff and then they're eating that and then they're making their sleeping quarters down below that. And under that is like the sifted out stuff that you can pull that bottom. Usually they have like 3 drawers of the good ones. And you take that out and empty that. And you don't want a lot of it. It's actually very strong. So very lightly, like the way you would scratch in a fertilizer, just
Right.
about that much. But you don't want to put a ton of it straight because it can actually burn the roots. It's that strong.
Mine always end up being very clumpy. Is it it's just like a solid, almost like a rock.
Oh,
When I take it out and let it dry out a little bit,
yeah.
and then it's like.
Well, we used to rub it all through a heavy screen with there was like a wooden tool that they sold for that.
Almost like a little brayer.
Yeah,
Like-
yes, actually, so that it just kind of breaks it all down through this heavy duty screen and you can always do that. My grandkids like to step on it.
Mhm.
That works too. Anything you can stomp on seems like a good thing, right? But yeah, you want to break it down a little bit, but scattering.
And does the paper that you put on top of it, does that matter it's.
The only thing you want to watch for the paper is, and this doesn't happen as much anymore, but you want to make sure that whatever the paper is printed with soy-based ink.
Oh, man.
Because a lot of the glossy stuff, if it's really a glossy newspaper filler, those are actually pretty toxic. But if they're not quite so glossy and they look a little second rate, those are soy.
Is the newspaper, the Seattle Times, they do soy, right?
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
common one.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think the local papers do too. But like those cardboard boxes that you get at a big box store will often have a very shiny illustration of what's in the box. And
Yeah,
oftentimes that actually is, it can be recycled, but I wouldn't put it in my worm bin or compost.
Mhm.
Gotta rip all that stuff off.
Yeah.
And use it.
Yeah, I have another veggie garden question. So my tree fell down next door and I asked them if they could have cedar chips. Well, now we have cedar shreds. I mean, it's pretty shredded up and we have we have a lot of it. And I was just wondering, it's got a lot of green in it too from the cedar, but would that be okay for the paths?
For the path, it's great, like what she's,
Some of it will.
shreds like
in
that.
Garden though, into.
Well, there are different grades when you get chips. There's like hog fuel is the biggest, coarsest stuff, and that's what they use along the roads and stuff. And that's great for a forest path, for instance. Or, in a shaded area where there's big trees and stuff. You can use that big coarse stuff and just the biggest lumpiest parts, I just throw them in the woods, right? They'll all break down on their own time. But then in the garden beds itself, you want like for the pathways, at least medium to coarse. Because if it's too fine, it's actually just going to sift down and start rotting and then you'll get weeds all growing in it happily. Right?
What to do with this big pile? I wish I wouldn't have asked you ask for something and you get it and you don't know.
You're like, now what do I do?
Yeah.
It's great if you have an area where you want to, like a big weedy or a section of lawn that you want to transform into something else. You can use the killer mulch deep and leave it there for a couple of years and then rake it off. And by then it starts to break down and you can put it, and again, diluting. So if you move from all cedar to putting down some compost, like rake those big cedar bits off, put down compost. And I don't till or mix it in, just mix in the planting hole. But you could start planting a pollinator patch or wild native plants into that.
Because you've given them enough soil to get
Yeah.
started.
Yeah, yeah.
We didn't plant any, when we developed our lot, we didn't plant any grass. But some grass kind of moved on into one area from across the street. It moved over a hedge and everything.
A wind,
Wow.
grass is
Yeah.
birds. Well, but grasses are
But
wind.
not all over. A real small spot where the plum trees are.
Mm.
I need to prune sometime. When is optimal for plum trees?
Well, are you pruning the structure of it or are you pruning?
The structure.
Because they're.
Not suckers, no, the structure of it.
Okay, that I would have done probably but you may still be able to do some, but now that the leaves are starting to open, I won't do structural pruning, just taking off. And any branch, you get these uprights that are called, water shoots.
Oh, yeah.
Now those you can take off, but again, I do that more in July. Because again, they're like suckers essentially.
Yeah.
And then there's also the hangers, the pieces that come down. And again, you can take those all off. You could probably get away with doing that. Because the window is sort of shifting right now, right? Because it's been sort of cold and weird and rainy. Things are a little off.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been cold. It was very cold late. I
Yeah,
think we're okay now, right?
I think
It's
so.
gonna be 40s, but probably not.
It was 36 yesterday
Oh,
morning.
my gosh.
So, yeah,
Minnesota, it was in the 70s and now they're having snow, so.
right. Well, and
Say.
that can happen anytime, right? And for trees, they don't care, that's okay. But it's
Yeah.
like all the nurseries are saying, they're always laughing, saying people come in February and early March and say, well, where's your tomatoes? Where's the, fresh herbs? And you're like, well, honey, it's cold. Those
Go
are,
south, go south.
right. Those are not,
Maybe in Arizona.
yeah. I mean, one person who was gardening with us today is from Southern California and we were discussing some of the differences.
Yes.
And that is certainly one of them, that they just don't have weather like we have at all,
No.
really.
Yeah, I sometimes spend time in the Metcalf Valley and I know that they spend a lot of time saying to people there, this isn't like gardening in the Puget Sound area.
It's not.
A lot different.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a growing season, but you have to know when to get involved.
exactly. And it's pretty condensed.
Right.
And the thing about that is like a lot of people are growing food crops. If your annuals have a very narrow window. And if they get stunted because somebody forgets to water them or they don't have enough nutrients or whatever it is, they don't recover very quickly and they're never going to be the same. Which is, and you can't transplant a taprooted carrot or something and expect it to recover and go on and be a carrot. So you have to really like be more of a nurturer with annuals, especially, edible annuals than you would with perennials, which are a lot tougher.
Right.
And then shrubs are tougher still and trees even more, though everybody needs a chance to get their toes in. And I used to say 2 or 3 years, and now I'm thinking more like 5, that I still kind of baby a plant maybe for that long because the weather is so different and you never know what you're going to get, a heat bump or a prolonged frost. We were talking about like 2 years ago, I guess it was, when it was 20 or 17 for like 5 days, which is,
Oh, yeah.
the thing is, it can do 5 nights, but when the days don't come up, usually, if it's 20 at night and 36 in the day, the plant is going, thank you, God, right? But if it doesn't get above 20 in the day, that plant has 5 days. That's why we lost so many plants. They just can't do that. Right? Yeah, because this is not Alaska. The plants that are gonna live there are gonna be okay.
Shrubs.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I am planting things, am I planting things like, for food, for my food, not the plant's food? Things that love to grow here in the cold, like kale and.
Well, the traditional day to plant your peas, St. Patrick's Day, right? So this whole week you can plant peas. And I started snap peas and snow peas, which I'm gonna bring you guys. But also all the greens, like kale, chard, bok choy, all that kind of stuff, broccoli, cauliflower.
Can you do spinach or is that?
No, spinach the Malabar spinach is very tender. Regular spinach is kind of, as long as it doesn't freeze, it should be
Right.
okay. I start a lot of that kind of stuff indoors.
Right.
And, as you know, I have the National Collection of Small Pots. So I can start things.
Yes, you need a pot to see Ann.
That's right. But I've used them many years, right? You just knock them out, like clean them out and then
When you start plants indoors, do you only use peat moss and a little
never, ever use peat moss for anything.
or the core that, those?
Oh, that's,
Gorgeous.
yeah, because that has no nutritional value.
Right.
So no, I don't use that. Peat moss is actually, mined in bogs and it can take over a century. You can look at old peat bogs where they've been cut and see cuts that were made like 100 years ago still look fresh. It takes so long for them to renew that it's actually.
That's what Martha Stewart said on the Sunday morning show.
Oh, good.
So she starts her seeds, so.
Well, shame on Martha.
Oh, she said she does start them in peat moss.
Yeah, she showed a real easy way to get stuff started, but.
I just want to tell you that not every television person who shows things does it themselves for real. Just.
Really?
Yeah, I know. It's kind of stunning, isn't it?
So should I do it with some gardens, some soil?
Not garden soil, actually. I use potting soil.
Potting, so. okay.
Yeah, because the garden soil is
I have.
not sterilized, basically, and our garden soil isn't that great for the most part. I used to actually sterilize soil until I realized what it does to your house. It's worse than cooking cabbage. It just stinks and it's hard to get the smell out.
And then it's real dry.
And it's really.
You try it.
I had to try everything. But the point is, don't do that. Just like if you're planting in the garden, okay, that's one thing. But for a lot of small stuff with this bigger, the weather's shifting all the time, it's better to get them started. And some people, my grandkids like to use egg cartons.
Okay.
And then you can just cut around and plant the whole thing, right? Soak it good and just put it in the ground or
Oh,
poke your
that's
finger
a good
through the bottom.
idea. I'm gonna do that.
And they're cute and they work and you're
So potting soil and egg
So,
cartons.
Yeah.
one thing though, those egg cartons are very expensive.
I know. They've gotten much more expensive.
Yes.
But I mean, it's good to not throw any part of it away.
Right.
Right,
Since you bought the whole thing for $7.
but you can also take like toilet paper rolls.
Yeah.
And do a little thing in the bottom and put them up and then put the plants.
Do a little thing in the bottom.
Yeah. Just cut and fit. It's like an origami.
Oh,
Cut and fold.
Oh.
You can also
You cut the yeah, so you've got little pieces on there and then you just push them up and then you plant the top.
Right?
Oh, wow.
There's
They
soil
stand up.
blocks. Have you ever done soil blocks?
Oh, yeah, I used to have a soil block
Yeah.
maker.
Me too. And then you wrap wet newspaper around them
Yes.
and that makes your own little,
that looks more like the Pete Boss thing that,
The cylinder things that you had in the
No.
paper or somebody.
so the soil blockers are like little cubes.
Mm.
And you take your soil and it's wet and it's like a press that actually compresses it and makes a little out of it. And then you wrap it with wet newspaper and so it dries as a little holder. So it's holding the clump of soil together, right? Stick your finger in, put in your peas or whatever it is, and then care for it indoors. And I have them on a repurposed baking sheet with a rim,
Mhm.
the one that got run over that time. That's the kind of thing.
or it was just too gross to put back in the oven.
Yeah, there's always one. Everyone has one, but I use it for that. And then when you plant them out, I just soak them so that it all is ready to disintegrate. And
Okay.
it's absolutely degradable and easy peasy, right? So there's that.
Easy peasy.
PC.
Right?
So we're talking about things that might be just a little too tender to be dropped in the soil right now. And you mentioned,
Yeah, well, tomatoes for sure.
oh, this might be even too early to start them, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because you'll be way ahead of
May,
planting.
end of May.
If you were starting them from seed, people would have already had them started and be, so big and then pot them up. And then you put them out usually like Mother's Day, because you have to watch the night temperatures. And
Right.
most of us have a phone that will tell you high, low, and you want the low to be in the mid-50s. Because 55 is like this magic number for plants that things like tomatoes, peppers, the heat-loving, herbs and more tender stuff, beans, that all will be happy over when the night temperature is 55 or above. You won't lose them to rot. But below that, yeah, at least,
Yes,
yeah.
don't be in a rush.
I'm not in a rush.
It's a long time to get to 55 at night around here.
It does, especially like we're still having those 30s, like the nights are in the 30s, even the mid 30s. So, yeah, no.
That's why in the Midwest, tomatoes do so much better. They taste so much better because they have warm nights.
Yeah,
And people can they can grow more crops in a shorter amount of time than we can here.
and they have fabulous topsoil as well,
That's true.
which we don't, because having been scoured by the glaciers, there's not a lot of topsoil around here left, and a lot of it is pretty degraded. And then, of course, it's been logged and everything else a bunch of times. And because Bainbridge Island used to be woodland, its soil is actually fungally dominated, right? So grasslands like the prairies, they're bacterially dominated. And so that's great for all kinds of annual vegetables and things like that, flowers, right? But fungally dominated soil is for trees and shrubs for the most part, right? So here we are trying to have a lawn.
So we should just focus on berries.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, think about the native people's, their sustainable gardens that are still good hundreds of years later. It's trees and shrubs, berries, they planted for birds, bears, and people. Because it's part of the cycle, right? If the bears were
Right.
happy, everybody, it's like it all worked. I just thought that was fascinating. You don't necessarily have to plant for bears. And I do think, be aware that if you're trying to grow a lawn,
Minded.
you're gonna have to, you work pretty hard to do that here because the soil is not really appropriate for it.
Right, you will get the grass that you're talking about, but it's pretty scrappy stuff and,
Yeah,
and it's not what you probably want anyway. You'd be better off, as you said, planting something that isn't a yard.
yeah, and looking for an evergreen ground cover that, like epimedium, I love those because they have really sweet flowers. And those you could weed whack
Yes.
once a year, shoom, in January, and then you'll see the flowers, which are like little birds on a wire. They're so
Yes.
cute. And then the leaves will come. Yeah, we have some right here in the back.
Yes.
The leaves will come and they're beautiful and they take fall color. Then they look ratty and you cut them down. It's just a once a year thing, which that's not too much, right?
No, that's,
Great fall colors.
I can do that.
Right, exactly, right. And that's what I'm looking for more and more. I mean, I'm 73, right? And some parts don't work like they did. We were talking about that when you start to climb a tree in your Crocs and you suddenly go,
Uh-huh.
oh, this is so inappropriate. I need to get down.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And when,
Looking at you, Rita. But,
I don't wear Crocs, so I'm good.
but you know, that
Yeah.
lovely illusion of youth that you sort of think, oh, I can't afford that anymore, right?
When I look at a tree, the architecture of a tree, I always think about climbing, I think, that looks like a good climbing. tree.
Yeah, exactly. I love climbing,
It'll never go away.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it does have to go away.
Yeah.
So
And ladders not too long after.
ladders
Yeah,
even
yeah.
possibly before.
Yes.
That's the third step,
Okay,
right?
that's right.
Yeah, my doctor had said nobody over the age of 70 belongs on a ladder.
I know.
You don't heal like you used to.
No.
So again, cause these things to be done by strapping attractive youth.
Mhm. Exactly.
Double benefit.
That's right. And you have intergenerational contact.
Yeah.
That's another checkbox.
Exactly.
I have a question about the raised metal bins. I have several of those in my yard, and I don't know if I should scrape off like some of the soil and replace it ever,
No, you can just keep layering.
Keep layering.
put more compost and
Yeah.
that's kind of what I've been doing, but
Yeah, because that's really what would happen in the natural environment, right?
that's true.
And every time you dig, it's like, again, that's like this huge earthquake has just happened and all the bacterial life, all the life of the soil is pretty much in the top few inches. And whenever we do this huge, configuring, it's taking out a lot of things that were pretty happy an hour ago, right? And
So when you add the compost, then do you just plant directly in the compost and you don't
yeah,
kind of dig the compost in or?
no, I don't dig it in at all. And in fact, I usually make a sandwich and I probably put chips on top of that. But when you dig, you can moderate the hole. Like mix some more compost into the digging hole, into the planting hole. And then make sure there's nice compost layer all around on top of that.
So the hole is surrounded by an undisturbed area,
Yeah,
Right.
either on all sides.
right, exactly.
But when you're planting veggies in one of these, do you just put compost on the top layer and
Yeah.
then what do you do?
And then plant,
There's seeds and.
yeah, well,
And then
again, I'm
grow
usually
around.
growing stuff from seed indoors to make sure that, because outside, birds will come, critters will
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
Your odds are not so great, but if you have them under your eye, like I have a little sun porch, it's not heated or anything, but it's more of an outdoor temperature kind of thing, so things get hardened off. If you're growing in a real greenhouse,
Vegetables? And do you start root vegetables inside?
yeah, because again, if you're gonna plant the whole thing.
It doesn't know that it's left the ground.
Right, it hasn't,
Oh.
So even your carrots, and
Okay.
stuff like that,
Okay.
yeah,
move the whole thing outside.
exactly, and it's not disturbing the root at
And if
all.
you don't have a sun porch like you're describing, can you do something like that with a ad hoc cold frame?
Sure, absolutely you can. And one good, if you have enough space, you can do a cold frame with bales of straw. 2 bales at the back and one at the front and kind of on the side and just use, like at Rotary, I used to get really good old windows and use those on sticks and just kind of make a filler, wedge on each side. Remember to open it up on a hot day, close it up at night, but you can certainly do that. Or, again, that rimmed baking sheet, I put that on a windowsill.
Hmm.
To make sure that whatever that it's sitting on doesn't get completely wet and warped.
Well, we had a lovely couple here who would bring tomatoes for many years.
Yes.
But I think they were growing them in their living room, which might be more than
And
I'm willing to do.
they were growing them in their daylight basement, which
Oh,
got
okay.
full sun. Which
Oh.
made total sense because they didn't really use it a whole lot. But yeah, it needs a lot of sun.
Right.
But, anymore, you can get beautifully grown plants. And the cool thing is a lot of Northwest growers, including Langley, Fine Gardens, which a lot of places here carry theirs, they've started growing them colder.
Oh,
So in the old days, everybody pampered them, so they were coming out and they thought they were in California. And then they would have one of our cold nights and go,
okay.
well, they literally stop growing. It like retards growth in plants that are accustomed to being warm. So if they've been grown a little tougher, a little cooler, then they'll be much more resilient when we get one of our cold rainy days or a cold night.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, and on sale. They're $6 at the grocery store. Why would you do anything else? Sorry, but
Plus at the farmer's market, will be opening on the
Right.
6th, I think, of April. There's several farmers there that have starts and the stuff is grown right here on Bay Bridge. So
exactly.
the soil and the temperature and the climate is the same. So that's
Don't
another.
buy your tomatoes now.
Just don't buy your tomatoes unless you want to move into them.
Unless you want to
Have
buy
them
them
move
several
into you.
times, right?
Right, exactly.
Right, you buy them 3 times because,
Right. Or you stop buying them and just buy them at the farmer's market.
yeah.
So-
I'll just take the tomatoes.
But it's also worth thinking about, like, when you have a small space, what do you actually eat? What do you actually
Right.
love? And, we go through a ton of broccoli, but so much that it wouldn't really be practical for me to do that. So I buy organic broccoli at the store, but fresh herbs, absolutely. Greens all the time. Sweet, fresh peas,
Right.
yes.
Peppers are fun.
Beans.
Peppers, I don't have enough sun for really
Oh,
getting
okay.
peppers happy, but out here in
Yeah.
the center, we could grow some nice peppers. Definitely garlic. I always grow garlic. There's a wonderful kind of garlic called magic, and it's been bred to just have big cloves.
Oh,
It's not like elephant garlic, but each head only has 5 or 6 cloves.
oh,
So it makes it so much easier because you're only not peeling the little,
Right?
Yeah, I tried to get that little.
Right?
I was doing that last night. It's like 20 of them.
I know, it's a lot. So
and
anyway,
where can you get those? Have you got them around here, Ann, is what I'm.
yeah, I got them from Dusk to Dawn Farms in Paulsbo,
Oh, okay,
and they were in the Paulsbo market.
okay.
But I think also they do Kitsap Fresh,
Oh,
which delivers to the island at the old
Right.
range, right? But yeah, some of the local farmers are growing really interesting, cool stuff.
right,
So why not, right?
yeah.
And garlic you plant in June,
Actually, garlic traditionally you plant at the winter solstice
winter solstice.
for the spring and summer crop. And then you can plant in the middle of summer for your fall and winter crop. So you have a twofer. But yeah, all the garlic that I planted around that week of the winter solstice is now heading up really nice, which is kind of fun.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Haven't harvested it yet, I see.
You're giving her a sniff.
You'd be able to tell.
Exactly.
Any other things we want to talk about? Maybe you should talk a little bit about are you guys going to plan to get together at least once a month here?
We are on the 3rd Wednesday of every month from 10 to 12, we'll be doing hands-on. And then we'll do this at
Okay.
30 after. And it's great to come with your questions, to come with anything you've been thinking about or.
And Rita brought her lunch or got a lunch and ate in between the gardening and the meetings.
Right?
Yeah, and you went home, did you?
No, I walked the dog.
Oh,
So there's a break there.
exactly.
Well, anymore, we need to recover after doing 2 hours. It's stupid.
Yeah,
We need a
yeah.
little time to have some caffeine and kind of kick back, right?
Well, it looks beautiful out there. Thank you very much for doing that.
Well, what's so fun is Rita and I planted a whole bunch of donated daffodils a couple of years ago, and they're all back. And then last year, I think we did more daffodils and tulips. And some of the grocery store places have given me, when the bulbs get blown out and they don't get sold, they're supposed to throw them away. But if you approach them at the right time, they'll just give them to you. And so I've planted.
I'll just throw them in your general direction.
Right,
I want to thank David Webb for the donation
Yes.
of the daffodils.
daffodils,
Yes.
yeah.
And those all got, we planted those all
Right.
last fall.
What do you do with spent tulip bulbs? They don't really regenerate as fast as like the daffodils.
They would if you fed them. So tulips have been hybridized heavily, so they're no, like daffodils will actually, those ones that we've had at the Waypoint and at the library, some of those are over 100 years old and they were taken from Mary Sam's cabin. She was the
Oh, yeah.
Suquamish midwife who helped a lot of people on the island and traded for plants. And when her cabin fell in, there was still kind of almost a rectangle of daffodils around it, which is so cool. And some of those were brought to different places, right? So they'll persist, and also because deer don't eat them. Now tulips, the deer do eat them.
Yes, they do.
And they're bred to they're actually sort of can't live without human intervention anymore, right? They're not able to really take care of themselves, except the little species tulips are still tough. But so what you want to do is when they're in the green, the flower's gone, you cut the head off because you don't want it to set seed and put all that energy into setting seed. So cut the part that looks like it's trying to make seed, feed it a couple times, 2 or 3 times, and then let them dry out completely in the summer. Like I put them under a bench or behind something so they don't get wet. Because in their natural environment, they would dry out completely. And if they get wet, they tend to rot in the summer or just shrink. But if they stay dry all summer and you fed them up in the spring, they're gonna have another flower next time. But they do need a little more nurturing.
Should you fertilize them with the flower on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then you cut the little top off right when it's.
and
about to
fertilize
seed.
again.
And then a little later, you're digging them out.
Oh.
So they don't get wet.
Yeah, or if they're planted, like the ones that are planted up in the back here at the center, they're not gonna get wet. We don't worry about that. If they're in the, tree shadow or
Right.
they're well drained or something like that, you can just leave them. If they're in part, yeah, I don't put them in when you're planting borders, you want to think that everybody's compatible. So you put things with similar needs together. So if I was going to do that, I would look at our front garden, for instance, say, we could put tulips in with oregano and all that stuff that likes a summer baking, and it's going to get really hot and dry in the summer. The bulbs will be happy and they'll come right up through. And that would work fine. Does that make sense?
Yes,
But in the big lush part of the border that you're going to be watering and feeding, no,
that's not the place you want.
that's not the place.
Good to know.
Now you know.
Now you know.
The most resilient garden bulbs are the species tulips and the Darwin tulips.
Oh,
which,
yeah,
Yeah,
Darwin.
they're pretty hardy. They'll persist a lot. Like in a lot of older gardens around abandoned houses or that, you'll see the Darwin tulips are still there. Poet narcissus, regular narcissus, and species daffodils, crocus, raisin crocus, right?
Beautiful.
Which is beautiful, exactly.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes.